Welcome to Dave's Faves of the Decade. That's right, today I'm going to be giving you my personal top 10 games of the entire decade. Only games released between the years of 2011 and 2020. Otherwise, knowing me, I'd probably just put Dwarf Fortress and TF2 on the list 5 times each. And what a decade it's been. We've seen the release of beloved titles like The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, Skyrim Special Edition, Skyrim for the Nintendo Switch, Skyrim VR. I think that's all of them. And of course, before I start, this is not an objective list. These are the games that I personally have enjoyed the most over the decade, and not games that I haven't played or never really got into. So don't be upset if I don't pick whatever shit games you guys like. And without any further ado, here are my favorite games of the decade. Starting with number 10, Rocket League. I fucking hate this game. I don't know what it is about car soccer, but it just works. This is a game that can make you either look like a complete idiot or an absolute esports god. There is no in between. But the feeling of actually managing to pull off something cool in Rocket League is exhilarating. I somehow amassed 600 hours playing this game on Steam, mostly with friends while trying to desperately claw my way past Diamond. But it's also the sort of game you completely forget how to play if you put it down for a few weeks, so I really never got any better. Although you could call it simple and repetitive, Rocket League is purely addictive and has plenty of high-octane, high-excitement moments, and scoring a winning goal 5 minutes into overtime had to be one of the most pleasing gaming experiences of this decade, and I think by pure virtue of how many hours of my life it stole, it had to be somewhere on this list. Number 9. Hollow Knight. Metroidvania has always been a genre close to my heart, ever since I got my grubby little hands on the DS Castlevania games many years ago, and Hollow Knight took that genre and gave it much more than a fresh coat of paint. Hollow Knight is the best game in the genre since the Castlevania games hit their peak, pure and simple. It has a great sense of progression as you delve further into its world and unlock new abilities to get past those areas once unpassable, and its beautifully designed world and environments only beckon you on further. The way your character controls is so fluid, and it works brilliantly with both the game's platforming and combat. The boss fights strewn throughout the map are memorable and challenging, and for those who like the 100% games, there's plenty of extra collectibles and secrets to discover as well. The aesthetics are stunning, the atmosphere is incredible, and the gameplay is fantastic. There really isn't much more you can ask for from Hollow Knight. Still waiting on the sequel though. Number 8. Factorio. If we go by its 1.0 release date, Factorio only snuck its way in pretty close to the end of the decade, but I'll be damned if it doesn't make it on this list. I honestly haven't played a lot of it compared to the other games here, but from what I have, it's pure genius. Such an addictive and grueling slog of efficiency and expansion. You'll be having lucid dreams about conveyor belts and train tracks for weeks after playing it. It beckons you on to expand your supply lines, keep gouging the planet of its resources, and pumping out as many research packs as you can. The game gives you so much freedom in how you approach it too. There's no truly right or wrong way to go about it, and I think that's what encourages you to tinker with your setups and make them to the best of your abilities, and is one of the best things about it. The sense of urgency the game creates as you vie for control of the map with the big Starship Trooper-esque bugs littered around it, as you also need to spend time making sure your setup is efficient, or in my case working at all, makes the game really interesting and challenging, and is sure to keep you hooked for days on end. Number 7. The Mountain Blade series, Bannerlord. I know Bannerlord was below Factorio on my favorite games of 2020, but I think coupling it with just how much I played the Mountain Blade series as a whole this decade has put it slightly higher on this list, along with the fact that I've played more than 100 hours of Bannerlord even while it's in early access. I was a little late to the Mountain Blade party, but ever since I picked it up, it's been one of my favorites. I've always loved making my way up from being a commoner to a powerful lord, and how there's no particular goal set for you in its big open sandbox world. One thing I love about Mountain Blade is how you have the strategy and management side of the game when you take control of fiefs, but then you still go out there and just slaughter motherfuckers from atop your horse. The combat is rather simple, but effective, and what really makes it fun is the scope of its huge field battles and sieges. Bannerlord is now what I would consider to be the definitive version of the game, even in its early access state, simply due to the extra scope that it has, along with all of the mechanics it built upon and added itself, especially its new Crusader Kings-esque character system, and Tale Worlds have been pretty good with it so far, so I'm excited to see where the next few years take us. Number 6. Civilization V Brave New World. Okay, before you tell me that Civilization V came out in 2010 and is therefore not eligible to be on my list, I'm talking about when Brave New World came out in 2013, which, let's be honest, is Civilization V's real release date. The goal of Civilization is simply to win. It's a great mix of alternate history and offers a strategic depth that's both friendly to newcomers but also deep enough to allow a good player to excel. In all honesty, the base game of Civ 5 was pretty lackluster, but with Gods and Kings and Brave New World, the game's quality increased immensely. One of the best things about the Civilization series is how it gives you a number of paths to pursue victory. You can be a warmongering scumbag, you can focus on having a big brain with science, or you can just be a coward and buy all of the city-states into your favor. There's a lot of freedom in how you approach it, and it offers a lot of replayability between all of its different civs. Civilization V is where I entered the Civ series, and with Brave New World it still remains one of my favourite turn-based strategy games on the market, and after sinking over 800 hours into it, it's definitely earned itself a spot in my top 10 of the decade. Number 5. The Football Manager series. God damn, I love Football Manager. I know it pulls the same bullshit as FIFA, where it makes the most of football's yearly database updates and makes you rebuy the game every single year, but unlike FIFA, they do at least try to include new features, and this game is actually good, so I can almost excuse it. I cannot think of a game that is more of a time sink than Football Manager. I wouldn't even say that Paradox Grand Strategy is as bad. I will launch this game up at 9 AM in the morning, and then after what feels like a few hours, it's 5 PM 3 days later. Football Manager just gives you that immense sense of freedom to take on whatever task you want and pray to God that it gets done, because there's no way to guarantee a win in this game. You can do everything right and still lose. And that's what makes it so exciting. No other game actually has me cheering and abusing players out loud quite like this one does. The terrifying lows, the dizzying highs, the creamy middles. Every journey in this game is unique and exciting in its own way, and for any football fans that are still only experiencing a career mode in FIFA, they need to sit their ass down and play some goddamn Football Manager. Number 4. The Crusader Kings series. This was a tough one, putting this in 4th, which you'll understand why when you see which game is in 3rd, but I think it came down to which one I had simply played more of over the decade, and 350 odd hours in Crusader Kings put it behind the other. But that's not to discount this game in the slightest. Both Crusader Kings 2 and 3 have absorbed copious amounts of my time for all the right reasons. It's a great mix of its sandbox, strategy and roleplay elements, and its character interaction creates a new level of depth not found in many other strategy games. There's no way I could possibly do the game's intricacies justice in this segment, but there is a great deal to its strategy and diplomacy, and every campaign can lead you down a totally different path. The sheer replayability on offer is one of the many reasons that this game is such a time sink, and is what has kept me coming back for more. Crusader Kings 3 was also a great addition to the series, and although I have certainly spent more time playing its predecessor, the newest edition has earned its place as a proper sequel rather than a glorified DLC expansion, and I look forward to seeing what it brings to the table over the next few years. Number 3. Europa Universalis 4. I think that you already knew that this was going to be the next game on the list, and it was very difficult for me to separate this with Crusader Kings, as they're both brilliant grand strategy games and are unique to one another. But with over 650 hours in Europa Universalis 4, along with it being set in a time period I find more interesting, I had to sneak it slightly ahead on my list. EU4 is similar in its approach to Crusader Kings, with its big strategic sandbox setting with no real goal in mind or winner at the end of it, but with more emphasis on your country and less on characters. years. It still provides a great sense of freedom along with a great sense of progression as you watch your nation grow from a few provinces to one of the world's great powers. Another reason I'm putting this game ahead of Crusader Kings is the soundtrack, which I'm guilty of criminally underrating in the past. The EU4 soundtrack is genuinely incredible and is one of my favorites from any games. You'd probably notice that I use it in my videos pretty often too. Paradox Grand Strategy was always gonna occupy some high spots on this list, despite all of the DLC money it has sucked out of me over the decade. But honestly, I still feel like I've got my money's worth from it. Number 2. Terraria. I'm going right back to the start of the decade for this one, but even basically 10 years down the track, my love for this blocky 2D world has not faltered. The amount of worlds created and lost, how many times I've killed that giant eyeball or killed myself in some stupid ass way, Terraria has been something I've spent countless hours in throughout this decade. Terraria is a mixture of a bunch of different genres, sandbox, action, platform, all different genres that it blends together so well. The building, the exploring, the combat, just about every aspect of the game is great, and there's little I can do to fault it. This game is still undoubtedly the master of the progression path. There is no other game that so smoothly transitions you from being nothing to being a godlike figure that commands the power of the ether quite like this one does. And with such a huge arsenal of tools and weapons at your disposal, there's almost no limit to how much of a badass you can be. I'll always remember Terraria as the reason I even made the Steam account in the first place, and the countless hours I've spent with it over the decade have left it not far behind my number 1 pick. And frankly, I'm disappointed in you if you haven't already figured out what it is. Number 1. Minecraft. Come on, it really couldn't be anything else. And before you once again remind me that in fact this game originally came out in 2009, I'm going by Minecraft's 1.0 release date, which was in November 2011, so checkmate atheists. Minecraft is a game that needs no introduction. It's a brilliant sandbox, pure and simple. I'm a strong believer that there exists no perfect game and that no game is truly deserving of a 10 out of 10 review score. But if there ever was a game that could justify it, it's Minecraft. I'm sure I'm not the only one guilty of coming back to this game every few months and just playing it non-stop for a week or two. Whether I'm there to go on an adventure and kill the Ender Dragon, or if I'm just there to relax and build stuff, I'm always having a good time. I hardly think that any game was nearly as influential as Minecraft during this decade. It created a huge genre shift in the market, it showed that indie developers can compete with huge AAA studios, and has become a lasting pop culture icon that is going strong to this day. It's really just such a simple concept, but it's still a game with endless possibilities, such fantastic creative potential, and a player base that is still in many millions of numbers. There simply isn't a game that I've played more of this decade, nor a game that has shown that it can stand the test of time as well as it. And for that, Minecraft has earned its spot as my number 1 game of the decade. And there it is, my top 10 games of the decade just gone, from Rocket League to Minecraft. What do you think? Do you think my list is pretty spiffy, or are you cancelling me on Twitter for my idiocy as we speak? Either way, hit me up below with a comment on what your top 10 games of the decade are. And before I close out, I'd still like to give a few special mentions to other games as well. Some games that came pretty close to making it onto my list, but I just couldn't find a spot for them. But they deserve to be mentioned nonetheless. Firstly, Banished, a game that took many more hours of my life than I expected it to. So many clones of this game have appeared on Steam since it came out, and there's a good reason. It's a damn good city builder. Secondly, RimWorld, if only for its similarities to Dwarf Fortress, but while it doesn't have quite the same amount of depth or complexity, it is the best game of its kind on Steam without a doubt. It's a much more accessible title too, so it's easier to see why it's so much more popular. And lastly, Darkest Dungeon. This is a game I play in short little bursts every now and again, but I always enjoy myself a lot when I do. It has such a brilliant aesthetic and atmosphere, and even when it's kicking my dick off, I still have a lot of fun with it. And I think that'll about wrap things up. Thanks for watching my top 10 games of the decade, hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again for the next installment of Dave's Faves.